Well, welcome back to another Coffee and a Chat. I'm excited this morning. I just woke up a little bit ago, and I came up out of a dream that has just really jazzed me up. So I shared it with Marvin, and because I was so excited, and we both kind of got excited about things, and so now I want to try and share it with you, and hope I get this thing right. So I'm asking the Lord to give me a clear mind, because I've not been feeling the best and not been the sharpest tack in the bunch, but that's kind of maybe the point of this dream too. So so in this dream, I was a kid and I was with my dad, and we were going to this potluck thing with this little ministry group. There would only be maybe 15 people there. And so when we got there, my dad went back and opened the back of the car up for us to get the food out that we were supposed to bring. And he picked up this huge package of frozen chicken. I was supposed to, we were supposed to cook chicken and bring it, for the meal that had been assigned to us. Well, here is this frozen package, and my dad goes, well, we'll just take it in and have them cook it. I'm like, Dad, it's frozen. And so he looks around in the trunk. Well, here's some chicken that's thawed out. We could take that in. And I go, it'll take another hour for them just to cook it, and we're supposed to bring it all ready to go so we can eat. And so he goes, well, I don't know. He goes, just dig around in the trunk and see what else you can find, and and we'll just take in whatever we've got. So I look around in the trunk, and I find these 3 tiny, they were a 1/2-inch long strawberries, little tiny miniature strawberries, and then this little, like a 1/4-inch cube of a dipping sauce of like a strawberry glaze that went with the strawberries, and that's all there was. And I'm like, Dad, this is all there is. And he goes, it's okay, just take it in and give it to him. I'm, Dad, but do you see how, this isn't even enough for one person. He's like, it's okay, just take it in. So I go in, and this one woman's standing there, and she she looks at what I'm handing. She says, what is this? And I go, well, we didn't get, there was some mix up with the chicken, and this is all we have. And she goes, okay. And and she's like, you can tell she's like, this is going in the trash. What is this? And I go, whatever you do, don't throw it away. Put it on the table. She goes, these are the smallest strawberries I've ever seen. And what is this? I go, it's like a glaze to dip the strawberries in. I go, put it on the table. And I was very insistent that she not throw it away, and she put it on the table. I didn't know why I was being insistent, but I just felt led, that she needed to put it on the table. And so she's like, okay. And, and I'm kind of like thinking, oh, they're going to just be so disappointed in me. And, and I'm just feeling really inadequate and everything. And I go sit down, and in this dream, this girl named Janet that I had, we'd grown up together in church, she's sitting next to me, and my dad and this other man, they, we're just in a house, and so we're in the living room, but they have this microphone. And so they're, trying to get things started, and those of us in the room are like kids, like maybe teenagers. And my dad goes, well, we want you kids we want you to share with us today. We want you to share with us, like some way this year that God has helped you to grow, how he's met a need, how you maybe, were able to, that God showed you how to be financially responsible, or just, and he's just kind of, doing this thing, we just want you to share something. And I didn't know exactly what to share, but the thought comes into my mind immediately that, well, I can share about that. And I felt very confident about it. And I felt compelled, like I'm supposed to share. And then I started thinking about something that had happened, and where I had trusted God, and what God had taught me through it, and how he was helping me to be, grow up and be more self-sufficient. And, and I knew I need to share that. And so I put my hand up. Well, Janet reaches up and kind of scratches her nose. And my dad goes, oh, you want to share? And I'm like, and he goes, no, not you. Janet, you wanted to share. And she goes, Oh no, I have nothing to share. I just, my nose itched. I was just scratching my nose. And he's like, are you sure? And she's like, yeah. And so this other guy that's up there with my dad goes, well, your daughter wants to share. And he goes, no, 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 no. She don't need to share. And she didn't have anything to share. And then he goes to, and he's going around from kid to kid. And the whole time, God starts dealing with me. And telling me, don't despise the small things. And I realized my dad is despising the small things in me because I'm just his child and I have nothing to share. If I had something to share, he would know it. And, and I already made a mess of the chicken. So, that's. So he keeps passing me up. And so as I, in this dream, I'm starting, the Lord kind of takes me almost like I was in a vision while still in the room with them, and he took me back to the time of the feeding of the 5,000. And he said, when you were a little girl and they would tell you this story and they'd say there were 5 loaves and 2 fishes, you used to think that meant, like when you go to the grocery store and there's this loaf of bread, it's all cut up for sandwiches and stuff. He goes, but now you're old enough to understand that's not what this boy didn't have 5 loaves of bread like what you think a loaf is. He goes, they were just like maybe a little roll the size of his hand. And I'm like, yeah, I understand. So he had 5 of those. And he goes, and do you understand that fish was just some dried up pieces of fish that, would be like fish jerky, because that's how they would preserve it. And then they would just put that with the bread and, make a sandwich or whatever, or however they ate it. And that was their meal. And so he goes, now, there were thousands of people there. I'm like, yeah. And this little boy is the only one that has food. And he brings this little lunch up to the disciples and Jesus, and he offers it to help feed the people. And the disciples probably were snickering, I imagine, like, that's so sweet, that's so cute, but that ain't gonna feed all these people. And Jesus took what this little boy had brought, and it says that he blessed it, and they gathered 12 baskets. Now God goes, now Angie, if they had brought 12, because it was 12 baskets, if they'd had 12 big baskets, that would, that's a huge miracle. But what if those baskets were each just the size of maybe a soup bowl? And as Jesus blessed the bread and broke it and the fish, and he fills those bowls, he goes, wouldn't that in itself have been a pretty amazing miracle? Like, yeah, 12 soup bowls out of 5 little dinner rolls and 2 dried pieces of fish. Yeah, that would be impressive. And he goes, and then he goes, but it didn't stop there. He goes, let's just say they are the size of a soup bowl. And then they go out and Jesus had told them to put them in groups of 50 to 100. And he goes, and what if they went out there and now, he goes, they went to each group, or he goes, not if, but when they went out there, they go out to feed them, right? And, he goes and they'd go to a group and pass it around, and everybody'd get as much as they wanted out of that little basket. And then he said, but after a while, hey, does anybody else still need to be fed? And hands would shoot up and they'd run over to that group until there were no more hands being raised, and everybody was happily visiting and eating and having their lunch. And so he goes, isn't that a huge miracle in itself? I'm like, yeah, that it fed all those people. He goes, but then what does it say in the Bible when they walk back, were they like holding the bowls like the, the baskets like this, kind of dipped out and say, this is my basket, where they like, because they're empty? No, they had to carry them back like this because they were still full. And there was more than enough to feed Jesus and the disciples, and the little boy ate more for lunch than he would if he just kept that little lunch that he had packed to feed himself. And so he goes, do you see how big that miracle kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it was enough? And I said, yes, that is amazing. And that they, when they were all done, they still had these baskets full of bread and fish. So now, what if the disciples had refused to serve those baskets? What if they had said, no, because Jesus, you weren't going to have them eat just some bread and dried fish. No, if Jesus is going to provide to feed for the 5,000, and we believe that he can and he will, well, then he's going to have it a catered event, and it's going to be the best of everything. I mean, it's going to be a feast to remember. But instead, it's this humble little lunch of a little boy. And I started to get what he was saying. And he's like, Angie, so many people are going hungry because my provision does not look like what they think it should look like. So they reject it. Don't despise the little things. And I thought immediately about those 3 tiny little strawberries and that tiny little dipping thing of glaze. Wouldn't even feed a mouse, maybe a mouse. Nah, wouldn't satisfy even a mouse. And that woman wanted to throw in the garbage because this is not part, but I kept saying, make sure you don't throw it away. You put it on the table. And I didn't know why I was saying that. But then as he's speaking to me, when he said you had, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, be removed. Do not despise the small things. And some of you are thinking, oh, I think that's a scripture. It is. And it's the day of small beginnings that we're not to despise. And if you're curious, that's in Zechariah chapter 4, verse 10. And actually, I'm going to go back and read the book of Zechariah, I think, today. Because this is a day devoted to the Lord for me, and I will just be focused, hopefully focusing on things of God. That is my intention for the day. But, I woke up out of this, and I was so excited, and, and Marvin was just kind of opening his eyes, and I'm like, I had this dream. So he knew, and so I shared the dream with him, and he, and it began to speak to him. And then we had a lot more things to talk about, things in our own life that I said, we're so bent on this thing, the prosperity thing. And, so many people are, and that, God, I need a car. And surely it's not that little Toyota. That's not God's provision for me. Somebody's offering them it. No, God's going to bring me a Mercedes because he knows that's my dream car. I remember listening to a pastor here a few years ago that was speaking at church, and he wasn't one of our pastors. He actually was visiting at the time, but he was talking about how he had 4 dream cars, I think it was, and 3 were already in his garage, so he knew God was bringing the. And these were very expensive cars, and because he wanted everybody to know that's the way God blesses us. I think we've gotten off track, you guys. God doesn't always send a catered event to feed us. The children of Israel had to go out and pick up this white flaky stuff called manna every day and eat it over and over again. There was only so many ways you could fix it. And, and after a while, even your most favorite food, if that's all you've got to eat, after a while, you're going to get tired of it. But it's what God provided, and it had everything they needed. It wasn't about the pleasure of the food. It was about the meeting of the need. And we, I think, have got to a point where we're caught up in the pleasure more than we are in the need being met. And so as Marvin and I were sitting there talking, I saw something under his, just under the edge of his nightstand, and I knew what it was, and I reached down and dusted it off, and it was this little shiny penny. And I said, my first husband despised coins. He used to come in with his change. When he had change in his pocket like this, he wanted the green stuff that folds. But these, he would take whatever coins and he'd throw them in the garbage. When we were first married, he'd throw them in the garbage. Now, I came from a family that didn't, we rolled it and took it to the bank. So I'd go down through the garbage and I'd get all that, those coins, that penny out or whatever he'd thrown in there. I'd go after it. So after a while, he'd just throw it on, when he'd come in, he'd throw it on the floor so I could pick it up off the floor or dump it on the counter or whatever. I remember when we were going through the divorce and he had stopped by one day. He'd brought me a coffee, my favorite coffee, and some red licorice. And he would do that sometimes. I'm like, why? I don't even understand why. You don't want to be married to me, but yet you want to, I didn't get it. But I had met him at the car because I didn't want him coming in. Because he would just kind of try to hang out and stuff. And I don't know what his deal was, but I didn't want to play that game. So I had seen him pull in. So I just walked out to the car and he's like, oh yeah, I brought you this stuff, I'm like, oh, okay. And he goes, because do you have everything you need? And I'm like, no, not really. I have nothing to feed the dogs and I have no food to feed me. I need to get some food. And I looked down at his feet, and covered in the floor of the driver's side of the car was like thick of coins. He was just throwing his change down there, say, because it was beneath him. They were small things. What's this penny going to do for me? And so I said, can I have the coins off the floor of your car? And he's like, sure, I don't care. So then I had, I got something, a little container, and I just started scooping in coins, and it added up to enough for me to go get some food for the dogs and for me, and I praised God for it. But to him, it was garbage. It wasn't green and paper and folding, and so he didn't want it. And that was kind of the attitude he had of it always, for as long as I knew him. So when my kids were like I think I had one in elementary school, one in middle school, and one in high school at the time. Or no, I had one in middle school, one in high school, and one already out of school. That's what it was. Anyway, I got this idea that I felt was God. And so I took, because I would collect coins. So I started on this one day, and I marked down the day for 1 year to collect just loose change around the house. And so as soon as I had enough that I could roll up $5, I went down to the credit union and I opened a savings account, because it took $5 to open the account, with my rolled coins. And the gals, it was a little credit union, everybody knew you and stuff. I loved it. I miss that credit union. But anyway, they're like, what are you doing? We've never had somebody come open a savings account with rolled coins. And I said, well, I'm going to save all the coins I find around the house for 1 year and just see how much it is, because I'm always finding, a few coins in the laundry or in the couch cushions or on the floor. You know how it is. And so they're like, yeah. And they go, but it's probably doesn't even amount to $20 or $10 in a year. And I go, well, I want to find out. So that's all I'm going to deposit in this for 1 year. And so I would keep, every time I'd find coins, I'd, like this penny, this one little penny, that's what started it, was a penny. Okay, so I would put it in this jar, and then when I had enough to roll, as soon as I could make any rolls, I'd take it down to the credit union and put it in. And so when the 1 year came to an end, and the girls were following me on this down there at the credit union, like, oh, you're bringing in some more, huh? Well, here's another 50 cents to throw in there, a roll of pennies, or here's, $5 worth of dimes. Wow, you got a $10 roll of quarters. Doing good, Angie. And so they would, I'd put the money into the account. So on the 1 year anniversary, because they all wanted to know when it was. So on that day, I brought everything I had left. So I had, some loose coins that wasn't enough for a roll, but I deposited all into that account. And it was $360 something, okay, like $1 a day that it averaged out to. And the gals were like amazed, and they're like, this is just coins you found around the house? I go, absolutely. And I were many days I didn't find anything. And I was like, Marvin and I were talking about it earlier. I'm like, I didn't find like $1 worth of coins and, in the couch, or $1 worth in the laundry. And, I can't explain it, but it kept coming and it kept adding up. And if I found a penny on the ground, when I was out shopping, in the grocery store, a lot of times you might find a penny. I'd pick it up and add it. So the gals, they looked and, and I'd maybe made like, 6 cents or something like that in the interest. And they're like, that is amazing. So they're like, we never thought that loose change could add up like that. Like there's, back, because this was back in the 90s. And they're like, who would have ever thought, but you can do a lot with $360 something. And actually right now I could go grocery shopping with $360 something. It would count. So anyway, a bunch of them started doing the same thing. They opened special savings accounts and only deposited coins for a year, and were shocked at how much money that added up to. And that was a lesson to me a long time ago. And I always keep my coins. I always have a little jar right over there. And and this penny's going to go in there after I do this video. But, I put it together and those little things gather. Now, Marvin was like, well, when did you get to share in the dream? I go, I didn't. My dad never called on me. But here's what I realize, okay? That even though I didn't get to share in the dream, doesn't mean I don't get to share, because I'm not going to despise the small things. I am so excited about this, and it's making me think and look at things differently of how God moves in our lives. And so, oh yeah. Anyway, I'm like, I can go share. I'm going to share this. I go, I've already shared it with you, and I'm going to go make a video, so hopefully I'm trusting God's going to keep the house quiet and the dogs quiet, and I'm going to get in there and I'm going to make this video, and so far so good. But I'm not going to despise the small things. Have I despised the small things? And we got to talking about different things. And there was a few years ago, Marvin, we wanted to get, and we still do, we wanted to get a different truck. One that had a double cab, but still had the long bed. Didn't need to be a crew cab, just so that there was the 2 rows of seats, because there are times when we have other people with us, and we could actually condense 2 of our vehicles into one, and get rid of 2 and replace them with that one, and and it was just for different reasons. This would really help us out, and so we started looking. We didn't have the money. Then God provided the money for the truck, more than enough money to buy the truck. And we kept looking around, and there's this one pickup we went to see. It really wasn't all that bad. But it was rough, and it had been driven rough. It was going to need some work, but they didn't want very much money for it. So we would have had enough money to do some work on it. But the tailgate for the truck was up in a tree and had been there for a long time. The tree was growing around it. And Marvin's just like, I just don't think that's the truck, and so we passed on it. It was going to be a lot of work, and then how are we going to get the tailgate out of the tree, because we need the tailgate, and and I go, what if that was the truck that God had provided for us? And we said, yeah, that's not what we're looking for, and he goes, yeah, I know, what if that was? And because maybe we were looking for something different than what God was sending. Maybe we were looking for a catered event and not a little boy's lunch. And so, it's got both of us thinking now, and we're both excited because there's different things that we're trusting God for. And it's like, we want to be where God wants us to be. We want to have what God wants us to have. And look at me. I don't need the coolest, greatest, most stylish. No. Marvin and I both are very, very comfortable with humble means, and very grateful, when God sends manna. But are there times when we're looking? And so just a little bit of a story about when Marvin and I met that I want to tag on here, because this is huge to me. So about 6 years before I met Marvin, the Lord asked me what I wanted in a husband. And so I began to tell him, and he told me to write it down and be clear. So I made a list, and he said, don't leave anything out. Even if you're worried about what color his hair is, whatever's important to you, put it on the list. So the first thing on my list was that I wanted him to love God more than anything or anyone else. So God would be number one. And the second thing on my list, that he would love me second to God. And not, anything else. Okay. So then there were other things that I had, on the list that I wanted, and I wanted him to be kind and, just, I don't even remember, because those first two things, those were the most important things. Either one of those would have been a deal breaker if they weren't true. And so I had this list. I still have the list. And then at around, it probably would have been a few years later, Marvin was wanting a wife, and God asked him what he wanted in a wife. Marvin told him, God told him, write it down and make it clear. So Marvin made a list. Number one on his list was that she would love God more than anyone or anything else. Number two on his list was that she would love Marvin second to God. And those were the two deal breakers. And then he had, all the other things that he put down that was important to him. Still has the list. Okay, so then we both hit a period of time where we're looking for, because we both want to be married, and we're kind of looking at what's out there. And both of us come to the conclusion that what was out there that we were finding wasn't good. It would be better to remain single. And so I know, I can't remember how Marvin says he said it to God, but I know I told the Lord, look, I don't want to be back in a bad situation like I was in. I want to be loved. I want to be cherished. Those things were on my list. I'm not finding anything good out there. So here's the deal. Unless you bring a man to me and set him down in front of me and say, here, this one, marry him, I'm done. It'll just be you and me, Jesus. And it'll be lonely because I really wanted a husband, but it'll be enough. And I left it at that, and I quit looking. Marvin had a similar discussion with the Lord, and he quit looking. And we both had come to a sense that we would just be single the rest of our lives. We didn't know each other. We had grandchildren in common, but we didn't know each other. And so March 9th, the year 2013, through these grandchildren, we lived 3,000 miles apart from each other, Marvin and I did. But one of our grandsons told me, because I was over visiting them, and he said, Grandma, I think you should meet our grandpa in Delaware. And I go, oh, why's that? And he said, because he's like you. I go, he's like me. Yeah, he loves Jesus like you love Jesus. I'm like, hey, honey, nobody loves Jesus like I love Jesus. And he's like, no, Grandma, he does. And I'm like, why do you think that? And he goes, well, because he goes to church 3 times a week. And I go, a lot of people go 3 times a week. Doesn't mean they love Jesus. They might just love church or somebody at church. And then, well, but he prays with us and he tells us, about the, things in the Bible and, and so then I'm going, so you might really have a grandpa that loves Jesus, huh? And he's like, yeah. And I said, well, you ought to call him up and tell him you got a hot grandma that he ought to meet. Because, first I found out he was single. I'm like, is he married? And they're like, no, he's not. And I go, well, you ought to call him up. Anyway, I was joking with the kids. I did not mean for them to call. So it was about 9 o'clock, March 9th, where we were at. Well, here in Delaware, it was midnight, March 10th. So I always make the joke, I met Marvin on March 9th, but he didn't meet me until March 10th because of the time difference. But this grandson kept trying to call his grandfather. But of course, Marvin wasn't picking up. He was asleep. But the phone woke him up. And so, and every time that Damar would call, he would try to leave a message saying, I've got this grandma you need, this hot grandma you need to meet or whatever. And he couldn't say it right. And so he'd hang up and try again. And so he's getting ready for like the third time to make the call. And his phone rings and it's his grandpa calling him. And he goes, oh no, it's grandpa. I go, now you've done it because it's after midnight where he's at and you woke him up. And so DeMar, I go, you better answer it. So anyway, DeMar answered the phone and and Marvin was worried something was wrong. And so then when he finally found out, no, everything's fine, he goes, no, I'm just trying to tell you. And he still couldn't get it right. And so he takes the phone and says, here, you talk to him, and shoves it in my face. I don't want to talk to him. I don't know this man. But anyway, long story short, with a snippy attitude, when Marvin tells the story, I was, as my brother Keith says, I was as cuddly as a porcupine. Anyway, we ended up having a talk on speakerphone and meeting each other with our grandkids there. And we talked for a good hour. And then later, we ended up talking to him some more. Anyway, Marvin and I have spoke every day since then. Not just a hi, how are you? I mean, we called and we had actual long phone conversations and really got to know each other. And one day when we were on the phone and our grandson was little, the one that lives with us now, he was a little boy back then, and he was getting ready for bed. He was over here spending the weekend with Marvin. He spent pretty much every weekend with Marvin. And so Marvin goes, just give me a minute. I need to pray with my grandson. Now, Marvin and I had prayed together over the phone before and everything, but I'm just listening to him with our grandson. And when he started to pray and he said, Father, there was something so connected, so intimate with God in the way he said that. And my heart did this flip-flop. And I was like, uh-oh. And I knew that moment that I was falling for this guy. Now, my mom knew before I knew, but anyway. So a year and a half later, or not quite a year and a half, a year and 4 months or whatever, later, 3 months, I don't know, Marvin and I were married. So because God did set Marvin down in front of me and say, here, this one, marry him. Now, there's more to this story, and I'm always hoping Marvin will come on here and we can tell the story together. But for Marvin, he had an idea of what his wife would be, okay? Of how she would look and how she would appear and everything. This ain't it. I had an idea of where my husband would live, and it sure wasn't 3,000 miles away. He would be there where I lived, so I would be around my family. So I didn't look the way Marvin expected me to look, and he didn't live where I expected him to live. And today as we're talking, I go, what if we would have said, God wouldn't send a little boy's lunch, he'd do a catered event. And we passed on it. We could have missed this whole thing. But we didn't. Even though, because I said this morning, I go, Marvin, did I look the way you expected me to look? He goes, you didn't. And I go, and it's not to do with looks. It's more of a racial thing, okay? He didn't expect my skin to be as light as it was. And so, anyway, he goes, I go, but did I fit the things you had wrote down on that list? He goes, yeah, you did. And I said, and did you live where I expected you to live? No, but you fit the things that I'd put on that list. God gave us each, both of us, what we had asked from him. It just, the location and the skin color were off. But does it matter? No. We have an awesome marriage. We're getting ready to celebrate 12 years this summer, and we don't fight. We've disagreed about things maturely like adults, but we don't argue or fight. We don't say mean things to each other. We laugh every day. And it's a choice. You don't have to go to war with your spouse. It is a choice. And we were older when we got married, and we'd already been through enough that we knew it's a choice. And we've chose to be kind and respectful and honoring of each other. And he is my best friend. I have so much fun with my husband. I couldn't imagine my life without him. And I feel pretty certain he feels the same way. So don't despise the small things. Even if the tailgate's up in a tree, does not mean it's not what God has for you. Even if it's only 1 penny, does not mean it can't pay for your family vacation. Because that's what one of the gals at the credit union was. She told the kids that, that they would take the money from the coins, what they had saved, and that would, they'd go on a camping trip in 1 year. So the more, coins that they gathered, the more, and so she said they all got into it. The kids were picking up coins and stuff too, but it was just spare change that you found or that was in your pocket. That was the key. And so, God can do a lot with small things. And I just want to share that with you guys today. Yeah. And it's awesome. So, I'm looking at things a little differently now, and I don't want to be caught up in this. And I'm sorry if it offends you, but I'm not sorry if it offends you, because maybe you need to take a look at it. I don't want to be caught up in this prosperity thing that has me looking for something that isn't God's provision because that's what I think I should have. I want to be willing to live where he wants me to live, to drive what he gives me to drive, to eat what he puts on the table, because it's enough. And it is a miracle. All right. You guys have an awesome day, and I'll talk to you later.